You are listening to the Techie Leadership Show with Bogdan and Andrei.
Hello and welcome to the Techie Leadership Show. Today with me I have Gina Gardiner. She is a #1 international best-selling author, motivational speaker, empowerment and relationship coach, and transformational leadership trainer with well over 30 years of experience helping people experience happiness, success, and fulfillment. She's the founder of the Thrive Together Tribe membership and personal and spiritual development program and the Enlightened Leadership Program. Hi, Gina. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me on your show. Really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. Do you want to add something else to your introduction?
I don't think so. I think people will get to know me and what I do through our conversation.
Oh, awesome. I love it. So let's take it from the top. In fact, I will let you choose. Do you want to start with the leadership success story or the leadership failure story? Which one do you prefer?
Well, I think for me, the failure story is very much about what I've learned from working with the leaders who had a style of leadership which was really poor.
Good.
And so for me, the learning has been, for the most, I'm sure I've made lots of mistakes, but in terms of the really big mistakes, I feel quite fortunate really that I was a head teacher, or I don't know if you call them head teacher or principal, for 21 years before I started working with businesses. And I only worked in 3 schools. I became a head very early. But the first 2 head teachers that I worked for were just awful. And I learned how not to do it. So my first head teacher, he didn't come out of his office until he had done the Telegraph crossword. But he was awful at crosswords. So he didn't actually come out of his office until 2 o'clock. He was so absent in terms of anything that was going on in the school. Fortunately, there was a brilliant staff team and they just got on with it. But every now and again, he'd come out of his office and whatever was going on, he'd come in, he'd disrupt that or say, what are you doing that for? When he'd given no direction, there was no vision, no direction, no interaction, no relationship. So that was my first experience of working with a leader. And what I found was that there were leaders within the workforce. So if leaders don't lead, other people will step up into that situation.
Yes, that's true.
And then in my second school, the head was so lazy that he would go off, and it was and we're talking about the late 70s now. Most days he was disappearing up to the local market to get his shopping or going to play golf or, and what I learned from him is that we would spend an hour in a staff meeting discussing things and making a decision. And then depending on who he spoke to, that decision would be overturned with no explanation.
Explanation?
There would be no explanation. He would just come in the next morning and say, I've changed my mind. So all of the discussion was of no account. And to add insult to injury, he would then go and decide we were going to do something else. Halfway through doing it, he would change his mind again.
Again? Oh my God.
You never knew where you were. And for me, what both of those head teachers taught me were, if you like, the central tenets of my work when I was leading my own organisation for over 20 years, and also when I work with leaders, and that is you have to have absolute integrity. You've got to walk your talk,
yes.
You've got to know your stuff, you've got to be genuine and hardworking, you've got to be compassionate and recognise that everything you say or do has an impact on other people. And the second head, he would come in and you never knew in the morning what sort of day you were going to have. Some days he was very friendly, other days he was grumpy, some days he was quite aggressive. So everybody was on the back foot. And so for me, that being professional, modeling the behaviours that you want from other people.
Yes.
And the third thing is to have the courage to do what's right. It's not always comfortable, and sometimes you've got to have the difficult conversations, or you've got to make hard decisions. But both those heads modelled that they wouldn't make the hard decisions. They always just did the easiest thing. So yes. I had great teachers.
Yeah, and it's a great thing that you're saying, Gina, because even if you have like a bad experience, you have like a leader it's one of the worst leaders that you could have. You can still learn how to be a leader just by not doing what that person was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for me, right the way through from, I'm in my first job, I started at 21. And, here am I now, several decades later. And those lessons have informed how I've operated as a professional all my working life. It would have been easy at one level to copy the way they were doing it, but it felt so wrong.
Okay.
And I was determined to do things very differently.
Yeah, it's good. That's how you have innovation and you have progress in anything. If you just copy what everybody is doing, it might be good. I'm not saying it might be good, but try to put your own spin on it, your own personality in it, to advance it a little.
Yes.
And then you also mentioned at the beginning that you work with a lot of leaders, and you've also learned a lot from their failures.
Yes.
Can you share what you have learned?
Well, for me, the situation is that I had a very bad ski accident when I was a deputy. And I was appointed very soon after that to be the acting head or principal, and then the principal, because my third head teacher, suddenly died one night in his sleep. And I'd only been
tragic.
A deputy for a year. And he was a lovely man and a great leader. So I had the opportunity.
A true tragedy.
And so I became a leader very early. And one of the things that was really important to me is that I made a success of it. But for the most part, I ran my school from a wheelchair. And the gift in that was that I had to find a way of supporting people to take responsibility for their own performance and have a shared responsibility for the performance of the team. And to do that without micromanaging, because I couldn't physically get into the classroom.
Yes.
Now, it turned out to be an incredibly successful approach. The school was on the best 100 schools in England list twice during my we were one of the first beacon schools, and so worked with dozens of other schools and hundreds of other teachers, helping them to use the same strategies and principles to improve the quality of leadership in their own schools. And I was invited to be an advisor to the government, and I worked with the National College of Leadership and the London Institute. And they're the same principles and techniques that I used with businesses with very successful results. And they're the bedrock of the Enlightened Leadership Programme. And there are certain principles about this. Number one, you've got to take responsibility for everything you think, you say, and you do. Take responsibility for your own emotional state, for example. And that was really important because my school was in quite an urban area. There was a lot of inherent aggression within the area. You looked at the way people drove.
Yes.
And I wanted something very different in the school. So just as a small example, I worked with the staff, and one of the strap lines of the school was we have zero tolerance of aggression and bullying. Now that
really good.
Doesn't mean that it didn't happen, all right? Because kids are kids.
Unfortunately, yes.
However, in order for that to be the case, every member of staff, teaching and non-teaching, had to be absolutely squeaky clean. It was no good saying we have zero tolerance of aggression if a teacher was shouting and screaming and hollering and lost their temper.
Yes.
So what I instituted was a training program for every member of staff, teaching and non-teaching, where they learnt to manage their own emotions, learnt to manage difficult people. So hand on heart, I could say to a child, you never see one of the teachers or the other staff being aggressive, do you? We say our truth, we tell people if we're not happy, but we do it in a professional way. I expect that from you. And I could say to the parents, come in, we'll listen to you, but not when you're hollering and shouting. So come and sit down, have a cup of tea, tell me what the problem is, and I will listen. But we don't do aggression here. And it was incredibly successful. But it was
I bet it was.
successful because it's no good just saying these things. And that's what often happens. People say, they have these strap lines or these values, which are meaningless because they don't translate into the behaviours on a day-to-day basis. So all of those principles that we had within school were supported by the structures and by myself and my senior teachers and my middle managers all modelling those behaviours, those principles. And one of the ways to do that was to have a shared understanding of what words like excellent mean. People say, we want it to be excellent, but your version of excellence in any context and my version of excellence in any context are going to be slightly different. But if you have a shared understanding of what that looks like in terms of behaviours, then you can start to really make a difference. And it's a process, it's a strategy that has worked well in a whole range of businesses. The widgets don't matter because we're talking about people.
No, it's so true, and it's something that now thinking about it is in all the businesses that I've been involved and for which I worked or I owned, is having the shared vocabulary and everybody knowing exactly what the term means.
Yes.
It makes the business smooth. It makes it easier to communicate, and communication is the most important part of the work because you cannot do it alone. If you're working alone, okay, you know exactly what you're thinking and you know exactly what it means, it's okay. But the second another person is involved, you need to have a shared common ground on which to stand.
This is true for life as well. If you're talking about partners at home, I talk about every relationship, but incidentally, every relationship is a reflection of the relationship you have with yourself. But in terms of the way in which you use language, and you'll have a blueprint for what each of those means, we're both speaking English at the moment. We could say that you're speaking oranges and I'm speaking apples. We're both speaking fruit, but we'll have slightly different meanings and understandings of different words and how they translate into action. And so when you create the shared language of fruit between people, then you can move forward. And for me, that's quite a simple analogy that people can understand.
Oh, it's a really good analogy, like the language of fruit.
Yes.
Cool. And would you have another leadership success story that you would like to share?
So I took over from my previous head as the head of the school, and I'd been appointed to be the deputy a year before in order to be the catalyst for change.
Oh, tough position.
I was the youngest bar two on the staff. Big staff. It was the biggest school of its sort in the borough. And when I took over, I had a lot of people who had been in the job for years and had always done what they'd always done. and I was very young to be a deputy, let alone to be a head. So, the view, I think, when I first took over was, well, what do you know? You're wet behind the ears. What have you got to offer us? We've been at this game. And one of the teachers, she was known as the Welsh Dragon, tiny. She was 4'10", and she was a real fireball. She had quite a temper. She was one of those that I needed to work with in terms of the no aggression. And she ran the library. And she colour-coded the books by the colour of the spine of the book. So it looked very pretty, but nobody had a Scooby of where anything was or how you found anything.
No way to find anything.
So the library ultimately just was a bit of a white elephant, really, or rather a multicoloured elephant. And I thought,
pretty to look at.
Absolutely, but absolutely useless. And so I thought, how am I going to manage this? If I just go to her and say, look, your library management's rubbish, that's not going to do anything. Yes. So I thought, I need to get her on board. I need to do something different. So what I did is I phoned the local area librarian, and I said, can you tell me the 3 schools with the best school libraries? And I spoke to the head teachers of those schools and arranged for us to go and visit. Now, the lady didn't drive, so I drove her. And I went and had a cup of tea with the head, because I didn't want to be interfering in this, although the head teacher had a quiet word with their librarian behind the scenes. And off we went to have a session with the librarian. So after the first visit, on the way back, I just said, you had a good, interesting visit? And she said, yes, and I left it. I have to tell you, the urge to say, what was it like? What did you think? But I sat on my tongue. And that's a really interesting leadership skill, is to know when to shut up and be quiet. Okay. So off we went to the second visit, and it was very much like the first. And on the way home, I said, you had a good visit? Yes, I've had a good visit. On the third visit, as we came back into the car, she said to me, I'd like to put in the Dewey system. What do you think? I didn't stop the car and go, yes.
Yes.
I wanted to. Oh, what a good idea that would be, said I. And I offered to spend some money. She got an army of parents to come in and help her. And within 6 weeks, the library was revolutionised. Now, the upshot of this was more than the library. And I think it's really important that people recognise that. If I'd gone in and I'd thrown my weight about, I may have won that battle, but I wouldn't have won the war.
Yes.
By being careful about doing this, so I preserved her sense of ownership of the library. And I gave her the agenda and the responsibility. What indeed happened is that she became quite different in school. When there was something new coming on, she'd say, I'll pilot that. And she would give it a go.
Whoa.
Her temper and her manner just transformed to being somebody who was positive and ready to try new things. And in fact, she was due to retire in 5 years when I arrived, and she stayed 10. And she was just as vibrant and enthusiastic at the end as she had been during that time. And I think there's so many lessons in there. Now, of course, there are times when you can't take that time. But in reality, organising the visits, doing the visits took me a month. But I got a decade of loyalty, of hard work, of engagement with other people in a very different way than if I'd just gone in and said, this is rubbish, I want the Jewish system.
Oh, that's so powerful. And in fact, while you're talking, I was thinking about the fact that as a leader, you need to work on your finesse and on your tact. It's a skill. It doesn't matter where you are at the moment, but work on it so you become more diplomatic and, and more pleasant to work with. Because if you throw your weight around, soon enough, you're going to have everybody against you.
I would say to you, to anybody, and whether you're talking about a leader or a team member or a member of the family,
Yes.
treat other people as you would like to be treated. And if you do that, you're very unlikely to go far wrong. You know, what we don't know is what other people are going through. And it's very easy to make judgments about a person and what they're doing. But unless
Yes.
you have real empathy for that person, you don't know. Until you walk in that person's shoes, you don't know. And so one of the principles that I talked to my staff about, particularly when they were dealing with children or parents, is you have no idea what's gone on in that day, that week, that life that's led
Yeah.
to that moment. And you can make assumptions and be so wrong. So if you assume motive, let me give you a simple example of what I mean.
Yeah.
Walking down the
Sure.
road, okay? And somebody who's a friend of yours walks past you and you say hello and they ignore you. Many people would think, oh, what's wrong with them? That's a bit humpy, and be really cross with them. But they don't know that that person hasn't had some bad news, or that that person is trying to work out a tricky problem in their head. And it's not that they've ignored you to ignore you, but they're just wrapped up in what they're doing.
Yes.
And many of us assume motive when the reality is that we're just collateral damage, that it's not intended to be a rejection. It's just that people are wrapped up in what they're doing. And I think it's important to remember that 95% of everything we do is habitual. It doesn't actually cross our conscious mind. And so
Yes.
we go into habitual patterns of behavior, of language and so on. And I would say to anybody, whether you're leading within your family, and for me, you have to lead your own life, because you're the common denominator you take with yourself every moment of every day.
That's
So
for sure.
why assume a negative motive? Why look for the worst? Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly.
And so instead of being humpy with that person, to be able to perhaps phone them and say, saw you in the high street, you looked really wrapped up in what you're doing. Are you okay? Rather than, look at them. They're supposed to be my friend and they've ignored me. And
not just give them the benefit of the doubt, but take it a step further. And
absolutely. And again, isn't that how you would want somebody to treat you?
oh, for sure. And now, based on all your experiences, what would be like your leadership philosophy?
Number one, lead yourself first.
Yes.
Take radical responsibility for everything you think, say, and do. Because every thought leads to emotions, which leads to actions and words. Recognize that if you want a better quality of life, if you want a better quality of relationship, if you want a better quality of leadership, then you need better quality thoughts. So if you focus on the negative, then that will expand. If you have a belief that you'll fail, it's almost a done deal. If you believe you might fail, you're going to make a different set of decisions to if you think to yourself, I believe I will succeed. Don't necessarily know how yet, but I will succeed. So ultimately, our thoughts translate into the quality of life that we have. Then think about your language, the power of language, not just to other people, but what's going on in your head. What's that self-chatter?
What you're saying to yourself.
Absolutely. Do you have one set of criteria for you and a different set of criteria for other people? In my experience, most people are much harder on themselves than they are on other people. They give other people great credit for what they do, but when you say to them, that's good, they say, oh, it's all right. It's okay. But if it was somebody
too much
else,
modesty.
say, fantastic. Now, there are very few people who do it the other way around and you tell you how wonderful
Yes.
they are, and actually it's rubbish. But ultimately, use the same criteria. And I would say, if you want to be a great leader, then knowing your why is so important. What's your purpose? Why are you doing it? Because if you want to create a vision that other people can engage in, if you want to be able to communicate that and use it like a lighthouse in the storm, keep people going when life gets tricky, you've got to have clarity of purpose. You've got to know, what does success look like? And so many people have no clue. So they're never going to know if they get there. And it makes it difficult to plan strategically. It makes it difficult to engage people in the vision and so on. And ultimately, I think, compassion, treating people well, being able to recognize potential in other people and nurture that potential is really, really important. And, being the best version of you that you can be in order to serve other people. And for me, leadership is about service.
Yes. Wow. You just gave me a lot of food for thought.
That's good.
Probably it's going to be tough to pick like 3 leadership tips you would have for aspiring leaders.
Sorry, could you say that again?
Probably it's going to be tough to choose just the top 3 leadership tips you would have for aspiring leaders.
That's easy. Number 1 is you have to lead yourself first. Managing your thoughts, emotions, words, actions. Okay? Because a lot comes
Be professional.
Absolutely. Model the behaviours you want from other people. Be consistent, be professional. Okay? That'd be the first one. My second one is take radical responsibility. And I mean radical responsibility. So if something's going wrong with your staff, look to yourself first. Have you been clear? Have you set the expectations clearly? Have you appointed the right person for the job? Have you trained and inducted them? Have you held them to account? So radical responsibility for you in order to then develop radical responsibility in others. And the third, I think I would say, is recognize that you have an amazing range of experience and talents, but if you want to really succeed in business particularly, a true family, you can't do it on your own. You can't be the expert in everything. And the best leaders are not frightened of appointing people who are better at them at certain things. They want the best of the best, and their role is to bring out the best and bring the team together. So, if you're a great leader, then what you want is a great team, and you look for the best in people.
Yes, it's your job to do it, so there's no avoiding it. And since we talked about having a better quality of thoughts, and you need to feed the brain with new ideas, what is the book that had the most profound impact on you?
I would say Stephen Covey's The Eighth Habit.
The Eighth Habit by Stephen Covey.
So Stephen Covey was famous for writing The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders.
Yes.
About 15 or 20 years after he'd written that, he wrote another book called The Eighth Habit. And in that, he talks about servant leaders. And for me, it didn't change my behavior as a leader, but what it did is confirmed that I was on, that I was a servant leader, and it put some sort of science behind it. I just did it instinctively. But I like his stuff. It's really great.
Well, it's always good to get confirmation for what you feel like.
And
this is the right way.
Some ideas in there. Don't get me wrong. I didn't know it all. But one of the things that struck me is that I then had a name for some of the things that I was doing that I didn't have before. But the two books together work very well. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Leaders and then the 8th Habit. Well worth a read if you haven't read them before.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to pick them up. I think I read the 7 Successful Habits of Leaders, but I haven't read the 8th habit.
I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I'll put it on my list. And Gina, where can people go to find out more about you?
If they go to either of the websites, all of my programs and lots of free resources on genuinely, then a hyphen, and then the word you.com. So that's genuinely-you.com. If you're interested in taking part in the Enlightened Leadership Program, which is a 10-month supported program, all online, so it doesn't matter where you are, then go to enlightenedleadership.co. That's enlightenedleadership.co. You can find me on LinkedIn, Gina Gardiner. You can find me on Facebook, Genuinely You with Gina Gardiner. I'm on YouTube. I've got a free TV series that you can sign up for on the website. I'm on Instagram. There's plenty of places to find me, and I'd love to hear from your listeners. And if I can help any of them, they can set up a discovery call to find out if the Enlightened Leadership program's for them.
Well, they should set up a discovery call, and I'll put all the resources inside the show notes, so people can find you and reach out to you, and I highly recommend that they do. It's been a pleasure, Gina, talking with you. Thank you very much for being.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye now.
That was today's episode. Tune in daily. Rate, like, subscribe, and share, please. Oh, you can find further info and materials in the show notes on techyleadership.com, including links to the guest book recommendations.